All right.
All right, Steve. So here we are again. So we started this experiment probably 2 or 3 months ago. We started recording and doing some streaming and videoing. And so we're trying to get a little more sophisticated here. So no sort of virtual backdrop.
Got the sun going on.
Even got a new cool speaker here for us. But you know, last week's weekly GL was actually the first time we had two guests on, and I thought that was pretty good, right?
Yeah, they were great. Great to have them. Very smart. Give us a lot to think about.
You know, we've spent the last 2 months, 2 months now, talking about free money, government programs, applying, and we're still dealing with that.
But I cringe every time I hear free money.
Yeah, right. But we're sort of beginning to think like, okay, we're coming into June and the new planning season starting, updating budgets. We just had a call with Venture Cafe and CIC talking about scenario planning, which was a topic that you did during the Monday weekly GL. Anyhow, point being, last week I thought was pretty cool, and I'm curious to find out what your findings were. Sort of, what are one or two things you walked away with? It's a topic that, for me, I view it as sort of like another quiver, right? Coming out of sort of this PPP money, EIDL, disaster loans, and liquidity is pretty tight, right? The banks aren't ready to take on. I mean, we just had a conversation with one banker, and he's just like, yeah, I can take your application. I have to by law, but I got to tell you, there's so much activity still going on with the CARES Act and SBA that they don't really have the time to be thinking about that. So
and just a refresher for the audience that might not have joined us last week, we had two guests on from Barton Gilman, local law firm here in the New England region, in New York as well. They were talking about the Rhode Island program, non-liquidating receivership, which not the best name in terms of marketing, but very descriptive. And it doesn't parallel, but it aligns somewhat with the federal program, the SBRA, both of which are basically ways for small businesses to access a tool that we were talking about, to be able to kind of go through non-liquidating receivership. The SBRA is actually part of the bankruptcy code. All sounds kind of like nuclear, end of day, like nuclear, but it is really a tool for you to be able to kind of pause and go through a process and come out on the other side. And so the things I learned
what
from
did
them,
you learn last week?
It was great to have them on. And aside from the kind of the nuts and bolts of what the Rhode Island program looks like, there's a few other state programs. I think it was really good to talk more about that as a tool, and even more in follow-up, it was thinking about what kind of profile of business is this really appropriate for, right?
Yeah.
As we go through this, there's so many tools, programs right now that are accessible, the PPP, the IDL, Main Street program, the SBRA, which one, not every company is going to be able or should. Able and should are two different things, right? Should access all of these programs, but
so what's one thing you kind of learned from last week?
Yeah, it's really the profile of the business is really one that we can talk more about this, but it needs to be a business that has not seen the rug completely pulled out from underneath them, that they can see life on the other side. Because if your business is going to fail, like a restaurant or super unfortunate, but the SBRA or the non-liquidating receivership would not be a good program, because it needs to be a business that basically just needs to be able to hit a pause button, hit a pause button for 3-6 months on all those requests coming in for cash from vendors, from all over the place, kind of hitting a pause button, saying, I'm putting a plan together. I think that's what it comes all back to me as we put this together, is planning. Right.
So that was one of my key learnings, is coming out of this, sort of the number one thing or attribute that a company has that can kind of use one of these programs out. You've got the money, hopefully you're not spending it. And I'm viewing it as like one of the key attributes is planning, right? That's that common thread. So maybe we can kind of talk a little bit about like what are three or four things kind of coming out of, what's that common thread of three or four things that small businesses have. The way I'm looking at it is like, whether it's SBRA or these more state level progressive pause plans, if you will, pause on working capital kind of plans. I'm viewing this as like, hey, you had the PPP money, hopefully you didn't use it. And sorry, I'm kind of going back to the PPP money, but it's a critical component of the liquidity profile of a small business today. You've got the PPP, you got the paychecks, let's call it the 3P program, right? And you're using it in such a way where over the next 8 weeks, you're using some of it for maintaining a skilled workforce, right? Hoping that you kind of come out of this. You've got the EIDL, right? Which was a huge win for a lot of companies who got in there nice and early. Hopefully you're not using that as sort of like, okay, now that I'm done with the 3Ps, I'm spending the EIDL just to continue what I've been doing and hoping to God that by August 15th, everything's back to normal. You and I, we're not on that page, right?
You have to have a plan for this about what are the strategic objectives you're trying to hit, right? I think one of the good things about the PPP is that it's getting people to business owners, small business owners, to think and plan, right? Because it is such a defined program. What's in, what's out, guidelines still developing, all that jazz, but they have to do scenarios in these 8 weeks, right? For better or worse, the guidelines are still being developed, but because of that, business owners have to think to themselves or think out loud. We've had these conversations with customers and
scenarios and mindset, right? Because you can have one business who ultimately blows through the PPP money, blows through the EIDL. And this could have been a really great sort of quiver, right? Another option to delay or pause, right? Having planned. This program doesn't make sense for them. It really doesn't. What this program makes sense. So if I have a key takeaway from last week's call was, one, if you planned accordingly, great. Two, or not just planned accordingly, but if planning is systematic in your business. Two, having open, transparent conversations with vendors and strategic partners, that's critical. Because again, I don't think this plan really works if you're an industry that is a consolidated vendor base. If you end up screwing one vendor, there's not really another vendor like right behind you ready to jump in. And by the way, we've seen this in the commercial printing business where the paper guys is all consolidated. Yeah. Maybe you've got a couple of mom and pop shops driving around in their trucks, but that business is pretty consolidated. So you screw one vendor, who's going to be there? Well, they're going to be there COD, right? That's not a good enough plan as an exit strategy coming out of these SBRA type opportunities, right? So point being, you plan accordingly for the first tranche of money and you're using the second tranche, you're comfortable with the risk of it being on your balance sheet over the next 2 to 3 years. EIDL, of course, is a 30-year, which is great, right? Relatively low interest, not the 1%, but it doesn't amortize as crazy as like the PPP does. And now you layer in this opportunity to go through a non-liquidating receiver type program with one, the plan, right? What's my plan during this program? And two, what's my exit strategy? Because what I heard from the guys, from the lawyers, was it's not just a pause, but it's a pause and then allowing you to execute on your plan so you get out. So those are the two first things I would say I learned. Planning, common thread. Two, having open, honest, transparent communications with vendors. What are some other things
I think just on a kind of a tactical level, these are being designed to be very accessible for the small business owner.
Right.
They're
cost effective.
Yeah, it's not going to be free. It's not going to feel cheap, especially in these times. But one of the biggest issues with on the federal level, the Chapter 11 bankruptcy, it was just so expensive. It was just inaccessible for small business. It wasn't economic. You just had to liquidate your business and move on, right?
But then you have personal guarantees.
I mean, hope you don't have personal guarantees. These are all designed to be very accessible, relatively affordable, and a little bit of some of that DIY, right? Like you do it yourself instead of have the pay the trustee or pay the. I'm botching all the. I'm not a bankruptcy lawyer, but it's meant to be accessible. It's meant to be. I'm going to create my own plan, and I'd warn you to have the right advisory team, whether it's your board, whether it's your advisory board, whether it's a good nuts and bolts lawyers. We've done this with lots of our customers. Help them put that plan together. And you may enter it with a plan, or you may need that pause to say, I need to put together a plan.
And one of the other things I learned from last week was you mentioned cost effectiveness. Like these type of opportunities can actually be pretty cost effective, because lawyers are actually, and advisors, they're actually willing to do this on a fixed fee. Just to get on the calendar, for example, and then maybe a fixed fee on the advisory side to put the plan together, be able to measure the plan, et cetera. So this can actually be a really cool, cost-effective way to get from where we are today, assuming that you're already planning, right? And kind of maybe seeing this through over the next, call it 12 to 18 months, because I don't think this is like the flavor of the month type of opportunity, right?
So what are the like a business owner that's looking at all these different tools? What are like 1, 2, 3 questions that they really should be asking themselves when they're assessing tools? What not really like looking at a particular tool, but what are some questions they should be asking themselves about their business? Like one is, what is the sustainability of my business in 6 months? I mean, everybody's been thinking about that and hopefully been planning for that, putting some scenarios together. But these are some big questions, because the SBRA or non-liquidating receivership. If I don't have a business that can survive in what I think post COVID is going to look like, then I'm not going to think twice about this. But what are some of those other big picture questions?
Yeah, I don't know. I really think it comes down to planning. Like, do you have the mindset to, have you been planning? Do you have a baseline? Are you thinking through the lens of like, what are the macroeconomic backdrops to these different scenarios? Because if you don't have the opportunity to like change your business plan, business model, if you're not thinking like, if you have your head in the sand, like this is not for you, right? You've probably already spent most of the fortunes that we've been so lucky to. I think this government has moved so quickly, so with such magnitude, and with all its hiccups. But I got to tell you, if you look back in 2008, 2009, it took the government like 12, 18 months to deploy something of this size. Unfortunately, I just think like the mentality of driving at 60 miles an hour, hitting a brick wall, 1, 2, having the opportunity to have this sort of free money, I think it's totally blindsided a lot of small business owners, and they're not realizing like, hey, this was a godsend. This was a godsend. Like, I gotta be not just good fiduciaries of this money, but I gotta be good fiduciary of my business, and planning is the centerpiece of this. And then having open, honest conversations with, what is my intent? It's not just show up one day with a plan, get on the calendar on the court, and all of a sudden cramming down a plan that, that you may have an exit strategy here, but there's no way in hell you're going to actually get out of this. So, anyways, with that said, we're excited. We were excited to have a guest last week, and we're having a special guest next week, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this all comes together. The stars are aligned. There's a lot of, I'm not going to be political here, but a lot of shortfalls in government policy. But one thing is for sure, over the last 2 months, I really feel like the governments, the state, federal level, local, have really come together to help small, medium-sized businesses get through this. And I'm excited. I'm excited to see what's going to happen. This is really crappy, the situation we're finding ourselves in. A lot of people are dying. but at the same time, this could be a lot worse. So with that said, look forward to next Wednesday. Monday is, of course,
GrowthLab Jump.
GrowthLab Jump, more practicals, more of a PowerPoint.
Next week, we'll be talking about
office hours as usual, every day, 3
your
o'clock.
adjusted budget.
Thanks.